For almost 6 years, Clara and I were the type of couple people described as relationship goals. We were effortlessly in sync, bound by a love of gaming and a quirky sense of humor that only seemed to deepen over the years. When we first met at a small gaming store, we'd both been eyeing the same rare copy of an RPG. What started as a playful debate over who deserved it more ended with us sharing coffee nearby, laughing at each other's overly passionate arguments about game lore. From there, things moved fast. Weekly gaming nights turned into long weekends together where we'd binge play entire campaigns, losing track of time and ordering way too much takeout. We had our own weird traditions, like celebrating every game launch we were excited about with homemade cocktails and themed snacks. Clara was my player too, in every sense of the word. By the time we moved in together, our life seemed like a dream. We adopted Pixel, a scrappy little mutt with a mischievous streak, who quickly became the glue of our tiny family. Clara adored him, and I loved how her face lit up every time he did something ridiculous, like stealing socks or chasing his own tail. In hindsight, the cracks were always there, but they were small enough that I dismissed them as quirks or minor bumps in an otherwise perfect relationship. Clara had always been a little private with her phone, but I didn't think much of it. She said she liked her me time, which often involved chatting with friends or scrolling through social media. Occasionally, she'd spend entire evenings texting, claiming it was Olivia or Mia, her two best friends. There were other things too. A few work trips had popped up out of nowhere in the last year, often to conferences or client meetings that didn't quite fit the predictable schedule of her job as a project manager. But Clara was ambitious and good at what she did, so I chalked it up to her career thriving. "You're going places," I'd tell her, and she'd smile, giving me a kiss that felt genuine. What made it so easy to overlook these things was how Clara was at home. She was warm, funny, and attentive. We'd spend hours laughing at stupid memes or arguing over which starter Pokemon was superior. She was Team Bulbasaur. I was Team Charmander. She'd surprise me with small gifts, like a new game she'd heard me mention or a limited edition controller I hadn't gotten around to buying. Clara had this way of making me feel like I was the center of her world, and maybe that's why I ignored the warning signs. I didn't want to believe there was anything to question, let alone anything to fear. But comfort, I've learned, is a dangerous thing. It blinds you to reality, wrapping you in a false sense of security while the foundation beneath you starts to crack. The first major shift happened about a year ago. Clara's me time started turning into away time. She'd go out for drinks with Olivia and Mia more often, sometimes coming home late and smelling like wine and unfamiliar perfume. I never thought to ask too many questions. I didn't want to seem controlling or insecure. Still, there was this strange feeling I couldn't shake, a quiet discomfort that gnawed at me when she wasn't around. It wasn't jealousy exactly. It was more like an itch at the back of my mind, a whisper telling me something wasn't quite right. I remember one night about 6 months ago when I brought it up for the first time. We were sitting on the couch, Pixel sprawled across Clara's lap while we watched some cheesy rom-com. "You've been really busy lately," I said, trying to keep my tone light. "Work, friends, trips? I feel like I barely see you anymore." Clara looked up from Pixel, her brow furrowing slightly. "What are you talking about? I'm here all the time." "You are," I admitted. "But I don't know. It feels different." She tilted her head, a faint smile playing on her lips. "You're being paranoid. You know I'd tell you if something was wrong." Her words soothed me at the time, and she leaned in for a kiss, which erased the lingering unease in my chest. But now, looking back, I wonder if that was the first moment I started to lose her, or maybe the moment I realized I already had. The real turning point didn't come until much later. By then, I'd fully convinced myself that the little signs, her late nights, her frequent phone use, her growing list of work commitments, were just normal parts of a long-term relationship. People change, schedules get busy, life happens. But Clara's change wasn't gradual, it was deliberate. And when the truth finally hit me, it wasn't subtle or easy to swallow. It came crashing down like a tidal wave, drowning me in betrayal I never saw coming. As I sit here now, replaying those moments in my mind, I wish I'd paid closer attention. Maybe I could have stopped it, maybe I could have saved us, or maybe the truth was always going to surface, no matter how much I tried to avoid it. One thing's for sure, what I thought was a perfect marriage was only ever a mirage. And now, all I can do is sift through the wreckage and figure out what's real. When Clara first mentioned the girls' trip, it felt like any other casual conversation. She was slicing an apple in the kitchen, casually tossing pieces to Pixel, when she mentioned that Olivia and Mia had invited her to join them for a weekend at a resort. "You should go," I said almost immediately, my default reaction whenever Clara mentioned taking time for herself. She worked hard, and while I wasn't the kind of guy who needed constant attention, I liked knowing she felt free to do what made her happy. "You deserve it." She smiled at me, soft and affectionate. "You're the best," she said, leaning over to kiss my cheek. Later that week, I watched her pack, her energy buzzing in a way that felt a little unusual. Clara always enjoyed these trips, but this time, there was a particular eagerness in her movements. She folded her clothes carefully, a mix of casual outfits and the sundresses she usually reserved for dates. "You're really looking forward to this one, huh?" I joked, lounging in the doorway. She paused, her hand hovering over a pair of sandals, and smiled at me. "Yeah," she said lightly. "It'll be nice to relax, you know?" I didn't think much of it at the time. Why would I? I trusted Clara. The day she left, she kissed me goodbye in the driveway, her luggage already loaded into Mia's car. "I'll bring you back something," she said, squeezing my hand. "Just bring yourself back," I replied with a grin. As the car pulled away, Pixel barked a few times before trotting back inside. I stood there for a moment, watching the car disappear down the street, and for the first time, I felt a strange unease settle in my chest. It wasn't anything concrete, just a nagging feeling I couldn't shake. I pushed it aside, chalking it up to the usual twinge of missing her whenever she went away. We'd been together for so long that even a weekend apart felt noticeable. I told myself it was nothing. Clara loved me, and we were happy. But as the days passed, that unease began to grow. The first night, I texted her to check in. She replied quickly, sending me a photo of a charcuterie board with the caption, "Wine night with the girls. Love you." I smiled at my phone, reassured by the normalcy of it all. The next day, I called her around noon, figuring she'd have a few minutes to chat. It went to voicemail. "Hey," I said, trying to keep my tone casual. "Just checking in. Hope you're having a good time. Call me when you can." Hours passed with no response. Eventually, she texted, "Sorry, bad signal here. Love you." I stared at the message, my unease creeping back. Clara's resort was in Cabo, hardly the kind of place with unreliable cell service. I reminded myself not to overthink it. She was with friends, probably busy enjoying herself. I didn't want to be the overbearing husband who couldn't let her have a weekend away. But then came the Instagram posts. Clara had always been active on social media, but this time, her posts fell off. The photos showed the usual girls' trip highlights, sunsets, cocktails by the pool, plates of fancy food. But something about the captions and the way she'd framed the shots felt overly curated, almost like she was performing for an audience. In one photo, she posed with Olivia and Mia, all three of them holding up glasses of wine. The caption read, "Besties forever. Girls trip Cabo life." I wanted to feel reassured, but instead, my gut twisted. Maybe it was the fact that Olivia and Mia hadn't commented on the post, which was unusual for them. Or maybe it was the way Clara's smile seemed forced. By the third day, my unease had turned into something closer to suspicion. I called her again, and once again, it went to voicemail. This time, I didn't leave a message. Instead, I texted her, "Hey, just wanted to hear your voice. Call me when you can." When she finally replied hours later, her message was short. "Having so much fun. Can't talk right now, but I'll call you tonight." That call never came. By the fourth day, I couldn't ignore the feeling that something was wrong. Clara had always been open with me during her trips, sending random texts and sharing little details about her day. This time, her messages were vague, delayed, and almost detached. I told myself I was being paranoid, but my gut wouldn't let it go. That evening, as I scrolled through Instagram for the fifth time, hoping for more clues, I realized I'd been holding my breath. Something wasn't right, and I needed to know what it was. Pixel jumped onto the couch beside me, his tail wagging as he licked my hand. "What do you think, bud?" I asked, scratching behind his ears. "Am I crazy? Or is something off?" Pixel barked in response, and for the first time, I let myself consider the possibility that my instincts weren't wrong. Clara was hiding something. I just didn't know what it was yet, and I was determined to find out. The night started like any other. I made myself a simple dinner, grilled cheese and tomato soup, while Pixel eyed my plate from his spot near the kitchen island. I was halfway through cleaning up when I noticed Clara's phone sitting on the counter, right where she'd left it. I'd seen it earlier in the week, but hadn't thought much of it. Clara often forgot things when she was in a rush, and I figured she hadn't realized it was missing. A pang of guilt hit me as I considered how many times I'd called her over the past few days, wondering why she hadn't called back. She couldn't have, I reasoned. Then it buzzed. The screen lit up with a message, and for a moment, I debated whether I should even look. Clara and I had always been open about our phones, but this felt different. Still, my curiosity got the better of me. I glanced down, and my heart stopped. Daniel. Can't wait to see you by the pool tomorrow. My stomach turned. Daniel. The name was familiar, but distant, like a face you recognize from a crowd but can't quite place. Then it clicked. He was a co-worker she'd mentioned months ago, someone from her department who'd recently joined the team. She'd brought him up in passing once or twice, usually with stories about how annoying he could be. I told myself there had to be an explanation. Maybe it was innocent. Maybe they'd become friends. But the heart emoji? That wasn't the kind of thing you sent to a colleague. My hands shook as I unlocked her phone. The passcode was the same as always. Our anniversary. My fingers hovered over the screen, a mix of dread and determination coursing through me. The message thread with Daniel was right there. It felt like Pandora's box, a forbidden door I shouldn't open but couldn't ignore. Taking a deep breath, I tapped on it. What I found confirmed every suspicion I hadn't wanted to believe. The thread was filled with messages spanning weeks, maybe months. They talked about their plans, shared pet names, and even exchanged selfies. But what hit me hardest were the recent messages. Daniel, can't wait for our trip. Counting down the hours. Clara, me too. It's going to be perfect. Just us finally. Just us. My vision blurred as I scrolled further. There were pictures too. Clara in the dress I'd helped her pick out last month, Daniel with his arm around her waist. They were smiling, carefree, like a couple on vacation. The air felt thick, suffocating. I put the phone down and pressed my palms against the counter, trying to steady myself. How long had this been going on? How had I missed it? I sat down at the kitchen table, staring at the phone as if it might offer me answers. The more I thought about it, the more the pieces began to click into place. The late nights texting, the work trips that didn't add up, the growing distance between us. It had all been there, clear as day. But I'd been too blind, too trusting to see it for what it was. Pixel patted over and nudged my leg with his nose, sensing my distress. I reached down to scratch his ears, my mind racing. What now? I picked up the phone again, my resolve hardening. I went back to the thread and took screenshots of everything. Every message, every photo, every incriminating detail. Then I emailed them to myself, making sure I had copies just in case. Part of me wanted to call Clara right then and there to demand an explanation and let her know I knew. But another part of me, the part fueled by a mixture of rage and heartbreak, knew that wasn't enough. She wasn't just cheating. She'd lied to my face, woven an elaborate story to cover her tracks, and left me to play the fool. If she thought she could walk away from this without consequences, she was wrong. I opened a search engine and typed in the name of a lawyer I'd heard about from a friend. It was time to start preparing. Clara didn't know it yet, but her perfect little girl's trip was about to come crashing down. The hours after discovering Clara's messages with Daniel were some of the longest of my life. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the phone, unable to stop scrolling through the damning texts. Every new message, every "can't wait to see you," and every heart emoji cut deeper than the last. It wasn't just the betrayal itself. It was the sheer audacity. Clara hadn't just lied to me. She'd orchestrated an entire deception, complete with alibis and co-conspirators. The trip wasn't a spur-of-the-moment fling. It was meticulously planned, down to the reservations at a luxurious resort in Cabo. Olivia and Mia weren't just covering for her. They were actively involved, posting stage photos to make it seem like they were all together, enjoying a wholesome girls' trip. I couldn't sit still. Every time I stood to pace the room, Pixel followed me, his tail wagging nervously as if he could sense my turmoil. At one point, I stopped in front of the fridge, gripping the handle tightly, trying to force the rage back down. I wanted to scream, to throw something, to demand answers, but I knew that would solve nothing. I needed a plan. By the time the sun rose, I was running on pure adrenaline. I hadn't slept a wink, my mind too busy calculating my next steps. Confronting Clara over the phone wouldn't work. She'd twist her way out of it. Or worse, use the distance to cut me off entirely. If I wanted to make an impact, I needed to hit her where it hurt. I called a lawyer first thing in the morning, scheduling an urgent appointment. As I sat in her office later that day, explaining the situation, I felt a strange sense of calm. Every detail I shared, every message, every photo, felt like reclaiming a piece of my power. "You've got a solid case," the lawyer said, her tone businesslike but sympathetic. "With this evidence, the court will see clear grounds for divorce. Are you sure you want to proceed?" I didn't hesitate. "Yes," I said firmly. and I want to serve her immediately. She raised an eyebrow. You mean while she's still on this trip? Exactly, I said, a grim smile forming. She's sitting poolside with the guy she's been cheating on me with. I want her to know I'm not just rolling over and taking this. The lawyer nodded, impressed by my resolve. I'll draft the papers today. You'll need to deliver them in person, though, if you want to make a statement. That's the plan, I said. Leaving the lawyer's office, papers in hand, I felt an unfamiliar mix of emotions. Anger, determination, and a surprising sense of clarity. For the first time in days, I wasn't spinning in circles, questioning what went wrong. I had a goal now, a way to reclaim my dignity and ensure Clara faced the consequences of her actions. I booked a last-minute flight to Cabo that evening, my hands shaking as I entered my credit card information. The ticket was expensive, but I didn't care. This wasn't just about confronting Clara. It was about taking back control of my life. The thought of walking into that resort, finding Clara with Daniel, and serving her the papers gave me a grim sense of satisfaction. I pictured her stunned expression, the panic in her eyes as her perfect little secret unraveled. As I packed my bag, I felt a pang of sadness, a reminder of the life I thought we'd built together. But that sadness was quickly replaced by resolve. Clara had made her choices. Now it was time for me to make mine. The flight was uneventful, though my mind raced the entire time. I kept replaying the messages, imagining the scene I was about to walk into. I didn't know exactly how Clara would react, but I didn't care. This wasn't about salvaging anything, it was about ending it on my terms. By the time the plane landed in Cabo, the sun was setting, casting the resort in warm, golden light. As I stepped off the shuttle and into the lobby, my pulse quickened. I didn't know exactly where to find Clara, but I had a pretty good idea. I asked the front desk for the pool area, and they pointed me toward a sprawling terrace lined with lounge chairs and umbrellas. My heart pounded as I walked through the resort, the papers tucked neatly into my bag. And then I saw them. Clara and Daniel were sitting side by side on a pair of lounge chairs, laughing over drinks like they didn't have a care in the world. She was wearing the sundress I complimented just a few weeks ago, her hair pulled back in the effortless style I loved. Daniel had his arm draped casually over the back of her chair, leaning in close as she spoke. For a moment, I froze. It felt surreal, like watching a scene from someone else's life. But then the rage came flooding back, grounding me, pushing me forward. I took a deep breath, steadied myself, and walked toward them. Clara glanced up as I approached, her smile faltering when she recognized me. Her eyes widened, and for a split second, she looked like a deer caught in headlights. Surprised to see me? I asked, my voice cold and steady. Daniel turned, confusion etched across his face. Who's this? He asked, but Clara didn't respond. I reached into my bag, pulled out the divorce papers, and placed them on the small table between their drinks. I think these belong to you, I said, my gaze never leaving Clara's. Her face turned pale, her mouth opening and closing as she searched for something to say. I can explain, she stammered, but I held up a hand to stop her. I'm not here for explanations, I said. I'm here to let you know it's over. As I turned and walked away, I felt a strange sense of closure. Clara's betrayal had shattered me, but in that moment, I realized I was stronger than she ever gave me credit for. This wasn't the ending I'd wanted, but it was the one I needed. Flying to Cabo felt like stepping into an alternate reality. The resort photos I'd seen on Clara's phone played in my head like a slideshow, each image taunting me with the life she was living while I was back home piecing together her betrayal. I imagined her sipping cocktails by the pool, laughing with Daniel about the husband she thought was too clueless to notice. The plane ride was quiet, the hum of the engines a backdrop to my racing thoughts. I didn't sleep, didn't eat, just stared out the window, rehearsing how this would go. I wasn't here for closure or explanations. Those were luxuries I couldn't afford. I was here to end it. When the plane touched down, a wave of humid air greeted me as I stepped off the plane. My bag felt heavier than it should have, weighted by the divorce papers and the emotions threatening to bubble over. As I hailed a cab to the resort, I went over my plan again. No theatrics, no screaming. Just deliver the papers, make it clear that I knew everything, and walk away. The resort was stunning, the kind of place Clara and I might have dreamed about visiting together once. Palm trees swayed gently in the breeze, their leaves framing the pristine blue of the pool that stretched out like a postcard. Couples lounged in cabanas, their laughter and clinking glasses filling the air. I scanned the area as I approached the main pool, my heart pounding with a mix of anger and adrenaline. And then I saw them. Clara and Daniel were seated side by side on matching lounge chairs near the edge of the pool. She wore a familiar sundress, the one I'd bought her last summer during a weekend trip to the city. Her hair was tied back in a loose bun, and her sunglasses perched on her head as she sipped from a tall glass with a little umbrella sticking out of it. Daniel leaned close to her, his arm draped casually over the back of her chair. He was laughing at something she'd said, his grin wide and easy. They looked so comfortable, so at ease, that it made my stomach turn. How could she live like this, so carefree, so blatantly callous, while I was back home, struggling to hold myself together? I approached slowly, my shoes crunching softly on the poolside tiles. Each step felt heavier than the last, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure they'd hear it. Clara glanced up as I got closer, her face lighting up with a smile, until she realized it was me. The color drained from her cheeks, her lips parting slightly in shock. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Daniel turned to look at me, his brow furrowed in confusion. "Who's this?" he asked, his tone casual, like I was some stranger wandering too close to their bubble. I ignored him, my focus entirely on Clara. "I think you know exactly what I'm doing here," I said, my voice cold and even. Clara stood abruptly, her drink wobbling dangerously on the small table between them. "I can explain," she stammered, her voice shaky. "Don't bother," I said, reaching into my bag and pulling out the envelope containing the divorce papers. I placed it on the table with deliberate care, the sound of the envelope hitting the glass echoing louder than I'd expected. Daniel glanced at the envelope, then back at me. "Divorce papers?" he asked, his tone incredulous. "Are you serious?" "Dead serious," I replied, finally turning to him. "And if I were you, I'd be careful. Your wife's probably not going to be thrilled when she finds out where you've been." His face paled, his easy grin vanishing instantly. He turned to Clara, who was frozen in place, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. "You've been caught," I said, looking directly at Clara. "No more lies, no more pretending. It's over." Her hands trembled as she reached for the papers, flipping through them with shaky fingers. "You didn't have to do this here," she said, her voice barely audible. "No, Clara," I said, my voice rising slightly. "You didn't have to do this. But you did. And now you get to deal with the consequences." Daniel stood then, stepping between us as if to shield Clara from my words. "Look, man, maybe we can talk." "Don't," I snapped, cutting him off. "Don't try to explain this. I've seen enough." Without waiting for a response, I turned on my heel and walked away. My legs felt like lead, but my steps were steady. Every fiber of my being wanted to look back, to see the fallout of what I'd just done. But I didn't. I left the resort with my head held high, the weight of the confrontation giving way to a strange sense of relief. It wasn't justice, not entirely, but it was a start. Clara and Daniel had made their choices, and now they would have to live with them. For the first time in days, I felt like I could breathe again. It wasn't over, not yet, but I'd taken the first step toward reclaiming my life. I didn't hesitate as I walked back toward the pool. My heart pounded in my chest, but I kept my expression calm, my steps steady. Clara and Daniel had stopped noticing me, their heads tilted close together in conversation. She was laughing at something, her hand brushing against a shoulder like they were the only two people in the world. I approached their table and stopped, towering over them. My shadow cast across their drinks, pulling their attention upward. Clara looked up first, her face shifting from relaxed to horrified in an instant. Her hand froze mid-gesture, the smile vanishing from her lips. "Enjoying your girls' trip?" I asked, my voice low but sharp, holding up the stack of divorce papers in my hand. Daniel blinked at me, his face twisting in confusion before realization dawned. "Oh shit," he muttered under his breath. Clara scrambled to sit up, knocking her drink over in the process. The bright orange liquid spilled onto the tiles, the sound unnervingly loud in the tense silence. "I can explain," she said quickly, her voice shaking. "I'm not interested in explanations, Clara," I said, my tone icy. I dropped the papers onto the small table between them, the sound of the stack hitting the glass like a hammer. "You can explain this to the judge." She reached for the papers, flipping through them with trembling hands, her eyes darting across the pages as if she could will them to disappear. Daniel sat stiffly, his mouth opening and closing as he searched for something to say. Clara began, but I cut her off. "No," I snapped. "You don't get to play the victim here. I know everything. The messages, the photos, the trip. All of it." I turned to Daniel, my gaze narrowing. "And you? Does your wife know you're here? Or does she think you're on a business trip? His face turned even paler, and he shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Look, man, this isn't—" "Don't," I said sharply, pointing at him. "You don't get to talk. You've done enough." For the next several minutes, I laid everything out. I spared no detail, recounting the texts I'd read, the plans they'd made, and the lies Clara had told to cover her tracks. I didn't shout. I didn't need to. The cold precision of my words cut deeper than any outburst could have. Clara sat there, her face a mixture of shame and panic. "Olivia and Mia knew," I added, my tone hardening. "They helped you cover this up. You all smiled in my face, acted like I was some clueless idiot while you ran off to play house with him. I never meant to hurt you," Clara said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. I let out a bitter laugh. "Well, congratulations, Clara. You failed miserably." Daniel shifted in his seat again, his discomfort palpable. "Maybe we should go somewhere else to talk." "You're not going anywhere," I snapped, glaring at him. "And you don't get to decide how this goes." The silence that followed was suffocating. Clara kept looking at me like she expected me to soften, to give her a chance to explain or justify what she'd done. But there was no justification, no explanation that could undo the damage. "I trusted you," I said finally, my voice breaking despite my best efforts. "For 6 years, I thought we were happy. I thought we were building a life together. And you threw it all away for this." I gestured toward Daniel, who had the decency to look embarrassed. "I made a mistake," Clara said, tears streaming down her face now. "A mistake?" I interrupted, my anger flaring again. "No, Clara. Forgetting your keys is a mistake. This was a choice, a series of choices. You planned this, you lied, and you brought everyone around you into it. That's not a mistake. That's who you are." She broke down then, her hands covering her face as sobs racked her body. Part of me wanted to feel something, pity, maybe, or regret. But all I felt was emptiness. I turned to leave, but before I walked away, I looked back at Daniel. "You might want to call your wife," I said. "She'll be hearing from me soon." As I walked out of the resort, the weight of the confrontation settled over me. I hadn't yelled, hadn't caused a scene, but the pain in my chest felt like a physical wound. Clara's betrayal had shattered the life I thought I had, and while confronting her gave me a sense of closure, it didn't undo the damage. It didn't heal the hurt or erase the memories of the woman I thought I knew. But it was a start, and as I left the resort, the envelope of signed divorce papers no longer in my hands, I felt a flicker of hope. It wasn't much, but it was enough to remind me that I still had a life to rebuild, and that I'd do it on my own terms. After I served the papers and left the resort, I felt like a man caught between two extremes. On one hand, there was relief, a cathartic sense of reclaiming control over my life. On the other, an emptiness that threatened to swallow me whole. Clara's betrayal wasn't just a single event. It was a seismic shift that had cracked the foundation of everything I thought I knew. Clara's call started almost immediately. The first one came as I waited for my cab back to the airport, her name flashing on my screen like a haunting reminder. I stared at it for a moment before declining. Then came the text. "I'm so sorry. Please let me explain. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. You're being unfair." I didn't respond to a single one. What could she possibly say to undo the damage? Nothing. I blocked her number once I was back on the plane. For the first time in days, I slept, lulled by the quiet hum of the engines and the weight of exhaustion finally catching up to me. Word spread quickly after I returned home. Divorce is rarely a quiet affair, especially when there's infidelity involved. Our mutual friends started reaching out, their messages filled with shock, disbelief, and in some cases, carefully worded neutrality. "Is it true?" one text read. "Clara cheated?" "I'm so sorry to hear about you too," another said. "We always thought you were perfect together." At first, I tried to keep things vague, telling people it was a private matter. But then Olivia and Mia got involved, and my patience snapped. Olivia reached out first, calling to clear the air. "You have to understand," she began, her tone annoyingly condescending. "Clara didn't mean to hurt you. She just got caught up in something. We didn't think it would go this far." "We?" I repeated, my anger simmering just below the surface. "So you admit you knew?" There was a pause before she said, "It's complicated." "No, Olivia," I said sharply. "It's not. You helped her lie to me. You covered for her. That makes you complicit." Mia sent a half-hearted apology text later that day, claiming she'd only gone along with it because she didn't want to lose Clara as a friend. I didn't bother replying. As for Daniel, his unraveling was as swift as it was satisfying. I'd learned enough about him from Clara's messages to piece together the essentials. He was married, with 2 young kids, and worked in middle management at some marketing firm. His wife, Rachel, had no idea what he'd been up to. I debated whether or not to involve her. Part of me wanted to leave it alone, focus on my own life, and let Daniel's marriage be his problem. But another part of me couldn't shake the thought of Rachel living in ignorance, the same way I had. So, I made the call. "Hello?" Her voice was soft, unsure. "Hi, Rachel," I began, my voice steady despite the knot in my stomach. "You don't know me, but I think you need to hear this." I told her everything. The trip, the text, the photos, every detail I had. I even offered to send her the screenshots I'd saved, proof of Daniel's betrayal. By the time I finished, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then came the sound of muffled crying. "Thank you," she whispered finally. I don't know what to say, but thank you. It wasn't revenge, it was justice. I wasn't going to let them walk away without consequences. In the days that followed, Clara's life began to crumble in ways I hadn't anticipated. Her affair with Daniel wasn't exactly a secret at work, and once news of our divorce spread, so did the whispers. I heard through mutual acquaintances that she'd been reassigned to a less visible role, likely to minimize the fallout. Friends who'd once fawned over us as a couple began distancing themselves from her. Some reached out to me, apologizing for not noticing sooner, while others simply faded into the background, too uncomfortable to pick a side. Clara's parents, who'd always treated me like a son, were devastated. Her mother called me one evening, her voice filled with guilt. "I don't know what she was thinking," she said. "You didn't deserve this." For a moment, I almost felt sorry for Clara. Almost. Despite all this, the fallout didn't bring me the closure I'd hoped for. The betrayal still lingered, a raw wound that refused to heal. Knowing that Clara and Daniel were facing the consequences didn't erase the pain or the questions that kept me up at night. How long had she been unhappy? Was there something I could have done differently? Or had I simply been blind to who she really was? The answers didn't come, and I began to accept that they might never. Instead, I focused on what I could control, myself. Clara's choices had destroyed our marriage, but they wouldn't destroy me. I'd make sure of that. The divorce process started quickly, the efficiency of it fueled by the mountain of evidence I'd provided. My lawyer had laid everything out in a neatly organized file. Screenshots of Clara's texts with Daniel, the photos of them together, and a detailed timeline of their affair that made her denials futile. When Clara was served, her initial response was defensive. "We don't have to do this in court," she said during one of the few calls I allowed her to make to me. "We can settle this between us. Don't you want to keep things amicable?" "Amicable?" I repeated, my voice cold. "You lied to me, cheated on me, and used our friends to cover for you. This isn't about being amicable. This is about consequences." Her tone shifted then, growing sharper. "You're being vindictive," she snapped. "We were both unhappy, and you're using this as an excuse to punish me." "I wasn't unhappy," I said, my voice breaking slightly despite myself. "I was building a life with you. You're the one who walked away from it." The court proceedings were surprisingly brief, though they felt anything but painless. Clara's lawyer tried to argue for her share of the house, claiming that it was marital property and that she'd contributed equally to it. My lawyer, however, made quick work of that argument, presenting the financial records that showed my name on the mortgage and my income covering the majority of the payments. The judge didn't take long to rule. With the evidence of infidelity firmly on my side, Clara's claims lost much of their weight. The house was awarded to me, and Clara was ordered to pay a portion of my legal fees. When the ruling came down, Clara looked utterly deflated. Gone was the confident woman who had brushed off her betrayal as a mistake. In her place was someone grappling with the reality of her actions and the consequences they carried. I'd be lying if I said I didn't feel a twinge of satisfaction as I watched her leave the courtroom, her head bowed and her shoulders slumped. But that satisfaction was fleeting, swallowed almost immediately by the ache in my chest. Clara moved into a small apartment downtown, far from the home we'd shared. I heard through mutual friends that she was struggling financially, dipping into her savings to make ends meet while juggling her demotion at work. "She's not the same," one friend told me during a coffee meetup. "She's quieter now, more withdrawn. I don't think she realized how much she'd lose, but no matter how much I won in court, it didn't undo the hurt." The house felt emptier than ever, each room filled with memories of the life I thought we were building together. Every corner seemed to hold a reminder of Clara. The couch where we'd spent countless nights gaming, the kitchen where she'd sing off-key while making breakfast, the bedroom where we used to dream about our future. Pixel became my only constant, his wagging tail and playful antics the only thing that brought a flicker of normalcy back into my life. But even he seemed to sense the change. Some nights, I'd catch him sitting by the door, his ears perked as if he were waiting for Clara to walk through it. The hardest part wasn't losing Clara. It was losing the version of her I'd loved. The woman who laughed at my dumb jokes, who stayed up late to finish campaigns with me, who once looked at me like I was the only thing that mattered. Now, I was left with nothing but memories and questions I'd never have answers to. Had she been unhappy all along? Was there something I could have done to change the outcome? Or had I just been fooling myself into believing we were something we never truly were? Those questions haunted me, replaying in my mind during the quiet hours of the night. But no matter how many times I turned them over, I knew I'd never find the closure I was searching for. All I could do was move forward, one day at a time, and hope that the life I rebuilt would be one worth living. Even if it meant starting from scratch. Rebuilding my life after Clara was like trying to navigate through a fog. Some days, I'd wake up with a faint sense of optimism, a belief that I could put the pieces back together. Other days, the weight of what had happened felt unbearable, like a stone sitting on my chest. The house, once filled with laughter and warmth, now felt too big and too quiet. It was strange living in a space that no longer felt like mine. Clara's touch was everywhere. In the curtains she'd picked out, the picture she'd insisted on hanging in the hallway, the throw pillows she loved to rearrange on the couch. But even as her presence lingered, there was a new kind of peace in the emptiness. I didn't have to wonder what secrets were being kept, didn't have to second-guess every text she sent or every trip she took. Therapy became my anchor. I'd resisted the idea at first, thinking I could handle things on my own. But after a few sessions, I realized how much I needed the outlet. My therapist, a no-nonsense woman named Dana, didn't let me wallow in self-pity. "You're grieving, and that's normal," she told me during our first session. "But don't let this define you. You're more than what happened to you." Pixel, my ever-loyal companion, was another lifeline. He seemed to sense my moods, curling up beside me on the couch when I felt low or nudging me with his nose until I got up and took him for a walk. Those walks became a daily ritual, a small slice of normalcy in an otherwise chaotic time. On better days, I'd reconnect with old friends, people I'd unintentionally drifted away from during my years with Clara. At first, it was awkward. I hadn't talked to some of them in years, and I wasn't sure how to explain what had happened. But most of them welcomed me back with open arms, their support a reminder that I wasn't as alone as I felt. I even started gaming again, though it took a while to work up to it. For weeks, just looking at the console we'd shared brought back too many memories. But one night, after too many hours spent staring at the ceiling, I powered it on and picked up a game I hadn't touched in years. It was a solo campaign, and for the first time in a long while I felt a sense of accomplishment, however small, when I finished it. The nights were the hardest. Lying in bed, the memories of Clara came rushing back. I'd think about the way she used to steal the covers, or the nights we'd stay up talking about everything and nothing. Those memories felt like ghosts, haunting me with the life I thought we had. I'd replay conversations in my head, searching for signs I'd missed or moments that might have changed things. Had she been unhappy all along? Was there something I could have done differently? The questions were endless, and the answers were nowhere to be found. Some nights, I'd sit on the back porch with Pixel at my feet, staring at the stars and trying to quiet my mind. The stillness of the night felt both comforting and oppressive, a reminder of how much my life had changed. But slowly, piece by piece, I began to rebuild. I started making small changes around the house, replacing the curtains Clara had picked with ones I actually liked, rearranging the furniture, and adding a few personal touches that made the space feel more like mine. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't quick, but each small step felt like progress, a reminder that I could move forward, even if it was one day at a time. Sitting down to write this feels strange, like a final chapter in a story I never wanted to tell. It's been months since everything fell apart, but the wounds still feel raw, the kind that sting when you least expect it. There are moments, quiet ones, usually, when the betrayal rears its ugly head, reminding me of what I lost and forcing me to grapple with what comes next. Clara taught me a painful lesson about trust, one that I'm not sure I'll ever fully recover from. Trust, I've learned, isn't just about believing someone won't betray you. It's about believing you're safe with them, that they value you enough not to. And when that's broken, it leaves scars you carry for the rest of your life. But if there's one thing I know now, it's that I won't let her betrayal define me. It would be easy to close myself off, to let the fear of being hurt again keep me from ever letting someone in. But I don't want to live that way. I refuse to let Clara's actions dictate my future. For now, I'm focused on healing, on rebuilding my life in a way that feels authentic to who I am. The house is starting to feel more like my own, a reflection of the person I'm becoming rather than the person I used to be. I've started painting again, something I hadn't done in years, and the canvases scattered throughout the living room remind me that creation can coexist with destruction. Pixel, as always, is my constant companion. He's grown into his role as my unofficial therapist, sensing when I need a playful distraction or a comforting presence. On our daily walks, I've started noticing things I used to overlook, the way the leaves change color in the fall, the sound of birdsong in the early morning. It's a small thing, but it reminds me that life goes on, even after it's been upended. I've thought about dating again, though the idea still feels daunting. How do you trust someone after you've been so thoroughly betrayed? How do you open yourself up to the possibility of love when the wounds of the past are still fresh? I don't have the answers yet, and maybe I won't for a long time. What I do know is that I'll never settle for less than I deserve again. Clara's betrayal showed me the importance of self-worth, of recognizing when someone isn't treating you with the respect and love you deserve. It's a lesson I wish I didn't have to learn the hard way, but it's one I'll carry with me as I move forward. The future feels uncertain, a blank canvas that's both terrifying and exhilarating. Maybe someday, I'll find someone new, someone who values me, who sees the best in me, and who builds a life with me that's rooted in honesty and trust. Or maybe I'll learn to be content on my own, carving out a life that's fulfilling without needing to rely on anyone else. For now, I'm taking it one day at a time. Some days are harder than others, but each step feels like progress, a reminder that I'm still here, still standing. Whatever comes next, I'll face it on my terms, with a heart that's cautious but hopeful, and a determination to build a future that's better than the past I've left behind.